Jimmy had always loved his home. Nestled at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac, it was surrounded by tall oak trees and imbued with a sense of peace that made the chaos of the outside world feel distant. But there was one problem: getting to his home had become an ordeal. The main road leading into the neighborhood had been neglected for years. What had once been a smooth, paved street had deteriorated into a jagged mess of potholes, cracks, and patches of uneven asphalt. Every time it rained, the holes filled with muddy water, creating deep puddles that made it nearly impossible to judge how bad the damage was. Jimmy had lost count of how many times he had nearly blown out a tire just trying to get home. Despite countless complaints, the homeowners association had done nothing about it for years. Each meeting was a frustrating exercise in futility. Homeowners would bring up the issue, only to be met with the same tired excuses from the board members. It's in the budget for next year, they'd say. We're waiting on approval, they'd insist. Other projects have taken priority, they'd claim. When Jimmy attended these meetings, a recurring pattern emerged. Concerned homeowners would raise their voices, and the board members would nod along with feigned sympathy, only to quickly shift the conversation to trivial matters, like landscaping projects or debates over acceptable mailbox colors. It felt as if the collective frustration of the community crashed against the board's indifference like waves against a stubborn cliff. Jimmy shook his head in exasperation during yet another meeting when he overheard Tom, his neighbor, complain with a knowing chuckle, "I've been at this for 5 years. They say they'll fix it, but it's all talk." Tom's resignation echoed Jimmy's own, and the thought of facing another year of potholes and false promises made his blood boil. That evening, after hitting another deep pothole that sent a violent jolt through his truck, he parked in his driveway, slamming the door behind him. As he walked toward his front door, Tom stood watering his plants, smirking as Jimmy cursed under his breath. "Another close call, here?" Tom asked, gesturing toward the road. "I swear one of these days I'm going to hit a hole so deep it'll swallow my entire truck." Tom chuckled. Good luck getting the homeowners association to do anything about it. That was it. Jimmy's patience had worn thin. He couldn't continue sitting back and letting this continue, not anymore. After a restless night, he sat at his desk, gathering all the information he could find. He took pictures of the road damage and began estimating how much it would cost to get proper repairs done. Researching local contractors and even getting a few informal quotes, he was determined to take matters into his own hands. If the homeowners association wouldn't do their job, then he'd ensure they had no more excuses at the next meeting. With a binder full of documents in hand, Jimmy arrived early to the meeting the following week, positioning himself near the front. Determination coursed through him as he listened to the usual chatter fill the room: older couples discussing trivial complaints, younger families keeping their kids in line, and the ever-present homeowners association board members, seated at the long table like a panel of judges. Lucy, the association president, was a woman in her late 50s, with a perfectly maintained bob haircut and a permanent air of superiority. The meeting began with more of the usual trivial updates. Someone complained about untrimmed hedges, and another person wanted to discuss the neighborhood's Halloween decorations. Finally, when the floor was opened for community concerns, Jimmy felt the adrenaline rush through him as he raised his hand. "Yes, Jimmy?" Lucy said, her tone already laced with impatience. Taking a deep breath, he stood up, hoisting up his binder. "I want to talk about the road. It's been falling apart for years, and we've all been waiting for you to do something about it. I've gathered information from multiple contractors and have a cost breakdown right here." Lucy cut him off with a practiced smile. "Jimmy, we appreciate your concern, but road repairs are not a simple matter. They require budget approval, contractor selection, permits. It's a process." "But how much longer do we have to wait?" he interrupted, his voice rising with frustration. "You keep saying it's on the agenda, but nothing happens." Jerry, the smug vice president, adjusted his glasses and chimed in. "Jimmy, we have other priorities: landscaping projects, maintenance for community facilities." Jimmy scoffed. "You spent $6,000 on a new neighborhood sign last year, but you can't fix the road we all use every day?" A murmur spread through the room, and several homeowners nodded in agreement. It was clear Jimmy wasn't the only one fed up. But Lucy's face remained composed, her smile never faltering. "We understand your frustration," she said, her voice condescending. "But the homeowners association is not in a position to approve such a large-scale project at this time. It's a project that can only be run by the homeowners association from its present location." Jimmy clenched his jaw, anger coursing through him. "Then let me pay for it. I'll split the cost with you. I'll even cover more than half if that's what it takes." This time, Lucy leaned forward, interest piqued. "I'm afraid that's not how this works. The road is common property, and any alterations need to go through the proper channels. Meaning? Jimmy pressed. Lucy's tone turned sweet. If you don't like it, you'll just have to find another way to your house. The words were intended as a dismissal, but as soon as she said them, something sparked inside Jimmy. An idea began forming, and his frustration morphed into something else entirely. Maybe I will, he said, his voice steady. Lucy merely gave him a thin smile, flicking her gaze to the next speaker, thinking she had shut him down. But Jimmy had already decided. If the homeowners association wasn't going to fix the road and wouldn't let him do it either, then he would take her words literally. He would find another way, and once he did, they wouldn't be able to do a damn thing about it. That night, a strange sense of satisfaction accompanied him as he left the meeting. Lucy thought she had shut him down, but in reality, she had given him exactly what he needed: permission, in her own words, to carve his own path. He returned home, mind racing with possibilities, reflecting on how his property sat at the very edge of the neighborhood, bordering an old undeveloped plot of land that stretched behind his house and led to a side road connected to the main highway. Not only was it not part of the homeowners association's jurisdiction, but if he could carve out an access point from there, he would never have to use their miserable road again. The next morning, armed with his coffee and determination, he walked to the back of his property. The weathered wooden fence that separated his yard from the overgrown land beyond had likely been there for decades, long before the homeowners association was formed. He checked county records to discover that the land had sat in limbo for years, last registered to an old development company that had gone bankrupt. That meant the land was up for grabs, and he had the perfect plan for it. By noon, he was on the phone with the county office, inquiring about purchasing a small section of the property, just enough to connect his backyard to the side road. The land was being auctioned off in parcels, and with no competing buyers interested in this section, Jimmy made an offer that was surprisingly reasonable. A few forms, some quick paperwork, and just like that, he had the legal right to do whatever he wanted with his newly acquired land. Excitement coursed through him as he mapped out his plan. The area would need to be cleared, leveled, and paved, but once it was done, he'd have his own private road, one that bypassed the homeowners association entirely. The sheer thought of it made him grin. Lucy and her little army of self-important board members had spent years ignoring the road issue and treating homeowners like helpless children who needed to be managed. But Jimmy was going to show them what real problem-solving looked like. As the work began over the next few days, a crew arrived with chainsaws and excavation equipment to clear the overgrown vegetation. The old wooden fence came down, opening his backyard to the land beyond. Every step taken felt like a newfound freedom. But the homeowners association quickly took notice. On the third day of construction, just as the crew was laying down the foundation for the road, Lucy pulled up to his driveway in her shiny silver SUV, furious. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" she roared, confronting Jimmy at the construction zone. "Building a road," he replied casually, savoring her frustration. "You can't just tear down fences and start digging up land. This is a neighborhood, not some backwoods free-for-all." "Actually, I can," Jimmy said, a smirk playing on his lips. "This land isn't part of the homeowners association. I bought it legally, which means you have no say over what I do with it." Lucy faltered for a second, as if the idea of someone bypassing her authority had never crossed her mind. But she quickly regained her composure and crossed her arms. "You are disrupting the neighborhood." Jimmy chuckled. "You told me to find another way to my house. That's exactly what I'm doing." Her nostrils flared as she glared at him. "This isn't over," she hissed. With that, she turned and stormed back to her car. Watching her drive away, a feeling of triumph washed over him. He knew she wouldn't let this go. The homeowners association would retaliate, they always did. But this time, he was one step ahead, and the road was coming whether they liked it or not. As darkness fell that evening, Jimmy stood on the newly cleared land behind his house and watched the last rays of sunlight dance through the trees. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of control that had been denied him for far too long. The wheels were set in motion, and there was no going back. This was his home, and he was taking it back. This was his home, and he was taking it back. The satisfaction he felt coursed through Jimmy as he watched the construction crew work diligently, machinery roaring and shovels digging. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the freshly cleared ground. He could almost envision himself driving down the new road, free from potholes and dread of future damage to his truck. But he also knew the homeowners association wouldn't go quietly into the night. They had been in power for too long to let a single resident disrupt their authority without a fight. As sleep beckoned that night, Jimmy's mind was a whirlwind of excitement and anxiety. He drifted off, envisioning his new road while anticipating the boom of retaliation from Lucy and the board. Sure enough, the next morning, he sprang awake to find an email notification lighting up his phone. It was from the Homeowners Association, and a cold knot formed in his stomach as he read it. They had filed a public complaint against his construction project, demanding an immediate halt and review by the county inspector. The words felt like a punch to the gut, but Jimmy was prepared for this. He had anticipated their moves and, armed with the county's approval and his own legal documentation, he felt more than ready to defend his right. He started his day, his determination setting the tone as he packed his files and headed to the site. When he arrived, he was greeted by the sight of his team already hard at work, despite the looming shadows he feared. He quickly shared the news about the complaint, breaking it down for them, but to his relief, Rick, his contractor, merely laughed. "Let them complain. We've got everything we need to back our work up. If they think they can bulldoze you with paper threats, they've got another thing coming," he said confidently, patting Jimmy's back. But even as the crew resumed work, Jimmy felt the tension in the air. He couldn't shake off the feeling that this was just the beginning. Sure enough, his instincts were right. Mid-morning brought the arrival of the county inspector, a middle-aged man with a buttoned-up demeanor that screamed bureaucrat. He walked the site, clipboard in hand, glancing over everything with a careful eye. Jimmy approached, trying to keep his nerves in check. "Morning," he said, trying to sound as casual as possible. "What brings you here?" The inspector cleared his throat. "Received a complaint from the Homeowners Association about unauthorized construction on this property. I'm here to assess the situation." Jimmy swallowed hard but maintained his ground. "Just so you know, I have all the necessary permits for this project. This land is private property, and no part of it falls under the Homeowners Association's jurisdiction." The inspector nodded but didn't seem convinced. "I need to conduct my inspection. If everything checks out, great. But until then, I have to follow protocol." As the inspector began his assessment, Jimmy felt his stomach knot tighter. He'd worked too hard to have this dream realized just to see it upended by a callous organization that had no regard for individual property rights. Time dragged on as the inspector measured and scribbled information into his clipboard. After what felt like an eternity, he sighed, finally looking up. "Everything seems to be in order, but I need to double-check a few things with the office. It might delay your project, but I'll do my best to expedite the process." Jimmy's frustration bubbled beneath the surface. "What does delay mean? You know they're trying to stall us, right? This is a tactic." The inspector shrugged. "My job is to ensure all necessary paperwork is accurate and compliant. Sometimes that takes time." With that, the inspector left, leaving Jimmy to stew in his anger. Before the day was over, Lucy's behind-the-scenes maneuvering had injected their project with uncertainty. The excavation crew continued to work, albeit with distracted focus and nervous laughter. As day turned to dusk, Jimmy decided it was time to push back. He reached out to his friend at the county zoning office, explaining the situation. They talked through the complaint and the inspector's involvement, and by the end of the conversation, he gathered crucial information that could turn the tide in their favor. The following day brought more than just another beautiful sunrise, it brought an unexpected visit from Lucy and the HOA board members. Determined to maintain authority, they arrived on site, flanked by cameras and a growing entourage of neighborhood residents, keen to witness the unfolding drama. Lucy strutted ahead, faux confidence radiating off her like perfume. "You can't just ignore the community's wishes, Jimmy," she exclaimed, putting on a show for the audience. "This is about what's best for all of us." Jimmy stood steely-eyed, ready. "Is it best for all of us to drive on a road riddled with potholes? I'm improving the neighborhood. You should be thanking me, not complaining." The crowd murmured, a mixture of support for Jimmy and apprehension toward Lucy. The board was losing its iron grip amidst the building storm of discontent. "You are breaking the rules," Lucy blurted, chaos simmering at the edges of her composure. This is unauthorized construction, and we will do everything in our power to stop you." "Everything in your power?" Jimmy echoed, challenging her, his heart racing. "I'm doing everything legally, Lucy. This is my property. Your threats mean nothing now." Rick had been quietly observing until that point, and he stepped forward, arms crossed over his chest. "I have a full set of permits and legal documents right here. If you think you can come here and bully us, then you've severely underestimated what Jimmy's capable of." The crowd shifted, excitement growing as they sensed the power balance was tipping away from the Homeowners Association and toward Jimmy. But under the surface of rising defiance, Jimmy felt tension coil through him. He couldn't let them derail this, not now. This road is going to benefit all of us, make it safer, easier to access. As the board members sputtered their indignations, Jimmy took a breath and turned his focus away from Lucy and toward the rippling crowd. If you've been frustrated with the board's behavior, voice your thoughts. Speak up. A few voices hesitated, but soon, several residents stepped forward, revealing their frustrations, years of neglect, growing concerns about the state of their neighborhood, and their wishes for something to change. Lucy's face shifted from anger to panic as the crowd began to rally around Jimmy. She turned on her heel and stormed back to her SUV. "This isn't over, Jimmy." "Not by a long shot," she called over her shoulder. But the battle was already shifting. Over the next few days, the construction continued, and the determination from both Jimmy and the community coalesced. They were ready to stand against the homeowners association's tactics. Each day brought news of more neighbors dissatisfied with the status quo, eager to join him in this newfound momentum. Then came the tipping point. A week later, news spread that Jimmy was not the only homeowner challenging the board. Another couple, frustrated with the board's choices about the poorly managed community funds, had decided to publicly announce their departure from the homeowners association. The tide was turning. Residents began rallying together, voicing their frustrations publicly, posting on social media, and even drafting petitions for change. Lucy and her cronies soon found themselves on the defensive as the community began to organize. Town hall meetings transformed from routine exercises into forums bursting with energy and outrage. As days turned into weeks, Jimmy stood at the heart of this growing movement. Every day brought new opportunities to bolster his case, but with it, new skirmishes from the homeowners association came too. He found himself preparing for yet another confrontation, ready to hear their threats while armed with clear choices of community support behind him. With each passing day, the challenge transformed into a movement, a clarion call to push back against the board's bullying. The upcoming association meeting promised to be explosive, a chance for the residents to voice their dissent and demand change. Little did Lucy know that her grip on power was slipping, and Jimmy was determined to drive the final nail in that coffin with the very people she had long disregarded. The battle lines were drawn, and the war for the neighborhood's future was just beginning. It was time to take action. The true fight lay ahead, and he wasn't going to turn back now. As the day of the homeowners association meeting approached, excitement crackled in the air like the charging of a storm. A palpable energy coursed through the community, born from a mix of relief, frustration, and a burgeoning hope that for once, their voices would be heard. The everyday monotony of lawn maintenance, gossip, and mundane neighborhood rules had given way to an awakening. This was not just about a road anymore, it had escalated into a confrontation against a mantle of authority that whittled away at the spirit of their community. Jimmy spent the days leading up to the meeting rallying support. He organized a gathering at the local park, encouraging residents to share their grievances about the homeowners association and to craft a united front. Over cups of coffee and slices of pie from the local bakery, they penned down issues ranging from road repairs to excessive fines for minor violations. "This isn't about one person anymore," Jimmy stated as the sun dipped low in the sky, casting a warm glow over their brainstorming session. "It's about what we want for our community. We deserve a safe, well-maintained neighborhood, one that respects the opinions and needs of its residents." Amid the clinking of mugs and the occasional burst of laughter, a newfound camaraderie emerged. The residents were no longer passive observers but rather active participants. Neighbors spoke up about their frustrations. Linda, who had been pressured into removing her vegetable garden for violating an obscure regulation. Mark, who was tired of the annual increases in the association fees that never translated into actual improvements. By the time they wrapped up the meeting, a sense of purpose settled over the group. They had crafted a document titled The People's Agenda, which outlined their demands for the upcoming Homeowners Association meeting. Enhanced road maintenance, transparent budget reporting, better communication channels, and the termination of unnecessary fines topped the list. As the official meeting day dawned, Jimmy could feel the excitement mixed with anxiety coursing through him. He dressed sharply in a button-up shirt and slacks, wanting to present himself as a person who meant business, not just another disgruntled homeowner. Posters were distributed, encouraging neighbors to wear the color blue as a sign of solidarity, an ocean of support to drown out Lucy's cries. Upon arriving at the community center, Jimmy was hit by a sea of familiarity draped in blue. The turnout exceeded his expectations. The air was electric with whispers and murmurs of agreement, a stark contrast to the somber, polished board meetings of yesteryear. The board members arrived moments later, a stark quartet of white-collared suits, faces pinched with disbelief as they took stock of the turnout. Lucy, with her impeccably styled hair and tightly buttoned blazer, clutched her clipboard as she forced her lips into an even smile. "We appreciate everyone coming tonight." But her voice held no warmth, and the tension in the room was visceral. The meeting kicked off, with the board attempting to maintain their usual agenda of mind-numbing small talk about community events. But every time Lucy attempted to steer the conversation back to mundane topics, a voice would ring out, someone from the crowd demanding the discussion shift back to the issues at hand. "Why are we spending so much on decorative lights when we can't even drive down our roads without risking a flat tire?" shouted a young father, his frustration echoing with genuine urgency. The crowd roared in agreement, passionate voices rising in an anthem of discontent. It was clear the homeowners association couldn't quell the tide of dissent. Jimmy caught the eye of a few board members. Jerry, who always wore a condescending smirk, visibly fidgeted, and his composure cracked under the pressure. Seizing the moment, Jimmy stood. Heart racing, he approached the front near the podium, fueled by adrenaline and the support of those behind him. He clutched the people's agenda like it was a sacred scroll meant to guide them through turbulent times. "I'd like to address this council," he said, his voice steady, but inside, he could feel the heat of anxiety building. "We've all gathered here tonight to assert our voices against years of neglect. We deserve better than this, better than unkempt roads, unjust fines, and rules that seem designed to stifle us rather than support us." His voice rang clear through the hall, and tremors of approval swept through the crowd. They were ready for him to lead them. "Tonight," he continued, emboldened by their nodding heads, "we present our demands not just as complaints but as hopes for a better community. We want to see clearer budgeting, accountability, and the freedom to voice our opinions without fear of repercussions." He held up the people's agenda, delivered with the reverence of a knight wielding his sword. "These are our hopes, and we won't back down until we get the representation we deserve." Applause broke out, reverberating through the room. The board members exchanged nervous glances, and Lucy's composed facade began to crumble as she processed the resistance gathering behind Jimmy. But the homeowners association wouldn't take this lying down. Lucy straightened herself, though her voice trembled ever so slightly as she spoke. "We will review your concerns, Jimmy, but you must understand that every decision in this association comes with rules, conditions, and responsibilities. We are not here to run a dictatorship," a voice interjected from the back, laughter rippling through the crowd. "Exactly," another chimed in. "They'll just go find some little thing to penalize us for. No more of that, it's time to stop being treated like children." Lucy floundered, her response dulled by the crowd's palpable unity. She cleared her throat, desperation seeping into her words. "I encourage you all to consider that rules are put in place to maintain order and property values. But at what cost?" Jimmy shot back, emboldened by the momentum of the meeting. "To what point do we keep sacrificing decent living conditions for the sake of arbitrary rules that lead to stagnation? We are not against rules, Lucy, we're against bad governance." The applause erupted again, far more than just a polite courtesy. This was raw enthusiasm, an energy that surged and spread throughout the room. Additional voices arose, one after another, sharing personal stories of their grievances, long-standing issues that had been buried under Lucy's iron grip. A few brave souls even hinted at the potential of disbanding the association entirely if change wasn't forthcoming. By the time the agenda turned back to focusing on renewed oversight of community projects and budget allocations, the meeting devolved into a heartening chaos. Residents united behind Jimmy's vision, marked with emphasis on accountability, collective readiness to take action, and sparks of resistance against Lucy. Minutes turned into hours, and neither Lucy nor her fellow board members could bring the meeting back to order. The tide had shifted beyond their control, and accusations flew, some openly questioning the ethics of how their funds had been managed, while others sought transparency in the association's operations. As they reached the peak of the uproar, Lucy finally snapped. "This is not how these meetings go," she cried, a flash of anger lighting her eyes. "You're all acting like individuals rather than fulfilling your roles in the community." Her attempt to reclaim authority was met with laughter and uproarious applause. The tide had truly turned against her. With a reassuring nod from his neighbors, Jimmy poured every ounce of conviction into the moment, ready to advocate for them all. "This isn't about rebellion, this is about rebuilding trust. It's about creating an environment where we feel valued and listened to." Moments passed, and with each confident word, the vision grew in clarity. He spread the agenda out on the podium, inviting anyone who agreed to come up and sign it. "Let this be our document for change," he announced, spreading his arms wide. The crowd surged forward, eagerly signing their names to pledge their support. As names flowed onto the page, Jimmy felt invincible. He wasn't just building a road anymore, he was paving the way for a new future, a future where each neighbor mattered, where they could rebuild their community, one signature at a time. This moment wouldn't be the end of the fight, it was simply the beginning. With their momentum building, they were ready to reshape their world, and it all started here. The storm of change was brewing, and they were standing on the precipice, united and unyielding. Little did Jimmy know, though, that Lucy had plans of her own. The night may have belonged to the community, but the battle for the future of their neighborhood had only just begun, one that would take everything they had to secure their newly found freedom. The echo of applause still ringed in Jimmy's ears as the meeting adjourned, a cacophony of emotions swelled within him. He felt triumphant yet anxious, knowing that this fight was far from over. The people's agenda lay signed and crumpled in his hand, a collection of unity and hope from his neighbors who were no longer willing to be silent. Lucy stormed out of the community center, her emboldened actions barely cloaked in indignation. The board may have lost that battle, but there was a simmering tension beneath her calm exterior. The war was still on, and she wouldn't let it end without a fight. As Jimmy left, he was met with backslaps and praise from his neighbors. "You did well tonight, Jimmy." "That was heartening," Linda exclaimed, her eyes shining with renewed hope. "I really think we can change things around here." "Yes, but we need to stay vigilant." "This is only the beginning," Jimmy replied, trying to temper their elation with the reality that change takes persistence. "Let's keep the momentum going." Over the next 2 weeks, the community buzzed with activity, fueled by their newfound solidarity. Homeowners began attending weekly meetings to discuss community projects, and social media groups sprung up, amplifying their efforts. The more they worked together, the more organized they became. But news soon reached Jimmy that Lucy had not been idle in her defeat. She began rallying her supporters, convincing some residents that the board was necessary to maintain order and curb what she described as mob mentality. Her words dripped with fear, painting Jimmy as a renegade aiming to dismantle the very fabric of their community. Tensions flared as old alliances began to splinter, and though many residents stood firmly by Jimmy, others felt unsure, doubting the promise of change and fearing the loss of their comfort zone. One evening, Jimmy received an urgent text from Mark, who had organized a counter-petition, manipulated by Lucy's fear tactics. "We need to meet, there's trouble brewing." Gathering the support of the original group, they convened at the park where they first united, casting worried glances around the circle as they settled in. The weight of unease hung in the air, as they confirmed their fears. A group of dissenting homeowners were meeting the next week for a special session, one designed to remove Jimmy and any member of the association who supported him based on unfounded allegations of misconduct, attempting to frame their movement as subversive. "We have to turn this around," Jimmy said, slicing through the apprehension. "Lucy has them convinced that we're the threat. But look around, we know what we want. We have their concerns, and we have the right to voice them." As the meeting progressed, the group forged a plan. They would prepare a counter-response to the slanderous petition, outlining the strides they'd made, the support they had, and the legitimate changes they were advocating for. It would entail bringing in residents who had benefited from the improvements and gathering a stack of testimonials from those who'd experienced the oppressive policies. As they left the park, renewed determination infused the air. It felt singularly focused. They were prepared to stand together against whatever Lucy could throw at them. Signs were crafted, pamphlets printed, and testimonies collected, aligning their efforts behind the banner of unity for change. However, the night before the crucial meeting, a torrential storm swept through the neighborhood, symbolic of their approaching battle. Thunder crashed as lightning illuminated the darkened sky, reflecting the turmoil of emotions within Jimmy. He had deep trust in his plan, but uncertainty gnawed at the edges of his confidence. He woke early, the sound of rain pattering against his window. The storm had settled, leaving in its wake freshly washed streets and the sweet smell of renewal. An unexplainable calm washed over him as he took a moment to focus on what this battle truly meant. It was not just about a road or even the homeowners association, it was about unity, empowerment, and the right to voice their needs. That evening, as the genteel crowd reconvened at the community center, the atmosphere was electric. Neighbors stood in clusters, spirited discussions pulsing vibrantly. A sense of solidarity armed Jimmy, who felt their backings weren't just numbers but a profound testament of support. As the board members settled in for the meeting, Lucy wasted no time attempting to seize control. You're here to listen, but the same cannot be said about the accusations being spread by those who wish to destabilize our community, she said, her voice sharp as glass. But Jimmy rose, commanding attention with the authority he had cultivated over the past months. We are not here to destabilize, you know that's far from the truth. We aim to enhance our community. Fostering open communication is essential for moving forward. The audience murmured, a mix of agreement and conflict rippled through the room. When it was time for testimonies, Jimmy invited his neighbors to come forward one by one, their voices rising with power. Each story told conveyed the burden of centuries spent in silence under the oppressive reign of the Homeowners Association. It was raw emotion, tales of misunderstood rules leading to unnecessary penalties, children crying over fine notices for stray toys left outside, families forced to become guardians of each inch of their property for fear of repercussions. As the stories reached their zenith, Luce's composure began to crack. The board members fidgeted, unease rippling through the room as the community rallied together. Finally, Jerry, the previously apathetic board member, stood to speak. I didn't think it would come to this, but seeing the unity in this room, I realize it's time our association starting listening. We can't rely on old ways if they're not benefiting our community. A thunderous response erupted from the audience, an ovation of realization. Change was brewing, and Lucy was losing her grip. What has this group done for you, Lucy? One neighbor snapped, sending tremors of tension rippling through her face. What have you done for us besides create more rules? Tonight we are calling for a vote. With roaring applause, Lucy hesitated, glancing desperately at her remaining board members, but their resolve had cracked beneath the pressure of the gathering storm. As the vote took place, the air thickened with expectancy. Each hand raised for Jimmy signaled not just restoration but a reclamation of community spirit. Onlookers watched, jaw-clenching as one by one, board members felt the seeping realization, they had lost the room. With one final tally, the result rang true, a majority had voted to dissolve the oppressive board structure and usher in a new era of accountability. As the meeting adjourned, a palpable wave of relief washed over the room. Neighbors embraced, smiles exchanged like currency, each expressing hopes unspoken only weeks before, transformed into reality. Jimmy's heart soared. He may not have single-handedly rebuilt the roads, but he had laid the groundwork for a newly vibrant community where every voice mattered. The fight had demanded steadfastness and unity, but it also ignited passion and friendship that would last well into the future. Walking out of the community center, he breathed deeply. The moon hung above, bright and unyielding against the backdrop of the dark sky, a symbol of their victory and the fresh start awaiting them all. In the distance, he could hear laughter and commotion. It was a new beginning, a home forged in unity over adversity. With renewed spirit, they turned toward a horizon blanketed in possibility, together to rebuild their community, stronger than ever.